Okay. Well, thank you for that answer. The question was very, very in depth. And so you mentioned universal grammar. Could you define it, what it is exactly?
Okay. I can't define it. I've never taken, as you know, a linguistics course in my life, but I know how to. I can tell. Uh, well, we can all tell a universal grammar violation. We can't tell if it's universal grammar or ordinary grammar because he ain't do that is not a universal grammar violation. It's an ordinary grammar violation. We can detect those. We can usually also say or retrieve why it's wrong. With universal grammar violations like John is easy to please Mary, we can tell it's wrong, and there's an infinite number of them, and we can tell all of them, but we don't know why. And the only ones who really know why they're wrong are the ones who have studied linguistics and universal grammar and partly reverse engineered it. They're trying to reverse engineer universal grammar capacity. And so, what was I going to say? So, universal grammar is a surprising discovery that Chomsky made. He wanted to know what language was, and he wanted to know whether there was anything that was universal to all languages. And we already know that you and I understand machka or machka, but people who speak English don't know. So vocabulary is not the same across languages. Grammar's ordinary grammar differs across languages. So, but there is something universal about grammar, and it's called universal about languages, and it's called universal grammar. It's certain rules that we never learn. They're unlearned. They're among the universal grammar is an innate category. The thing that you asked about.
Mm.
You are born not able to speak language. We need a little bit of training to be able to speak language. But once we start speaking language, we're born with the capacity to obey universal grammar rules. We are not born with ordinary grammar rules. We have to be taught them, and we certainly make mistakes about them. So they're different. Universal grammar is those rules that all languages must obey in order to be languages. And then universal particular grammars are sort of parametric variations of how you can do that, including ordinary grammar and vocabulary and various other things. That's universal grammar, and it has a peculiar characteristic, which is hidden in what I just said, which is children don't learn it.
Yeah.
They learn language, but they don't learn it. And the reason that with vocabulary, you have to learn. You go through a child's picture book and you tell it this is a bear and this is a gorilla and this is a dog, and then you show more bears and more gorillas and more dogs, and then the child points to a gorilla and says bear, and you say no, that's not a bear, that's a gorilla, and then it gets corrected, it gets the features, it does the category learning, and in the end it can tell apart gorillas and bears. In the case of universal and ordinary grammar is pretty much like that. You learn ordinary grammar also by trial and error with correction. Some of it you can learn by unsupervised learning, which is by just being exposed, hearing it often enough, and then you say, aha, I get it. Okay. Um, but with universal grammar, you know it from the get-go. You never violate it. The only ones who ever violate universal grammar are, well, there's two kinds of people, linguists, and they do it deliberately when they're trying to figure out what the rules of universal grammar are, and people who are speaking uh, a language that's not their first language, and they're using the parametric setting of their first language in their learned a second language, and it artificially produces a universal grammar error, and they can't tell that it's a universal grammar error, or they say something that, yeah, for example, a Hungarian might say, uh, I'll say it with a Hungarian accent. Um, John is easy to please marry because in Hungarian, can you, yeah, because the parameters of Hungarian different, and there something that that seems to be a translation of that is okay,
Mm.
but that's only because Hungary has different parameters, and those parameters are all on I can't discuss what parameters are now, but they're all features of you have universal grammar, but you have to learn your particular grammar. And that particular grammar sets certain parameters on universal grammar in your first language. When you're learning your second language, it's not, you've got your parameters set already. So sometimes you read those onto some of the forms of the second language, and it gives you these weird errors also. So some second language errors. I learned this from ChatGPT, by the way. I didn't know that. And maybe it's not even true, but what ChatGPT 4 said was that I said, okay, why do children not make universal grammar errors? Why is there a poverty of the stimulus? Why do you not have? Why? How come you can learn the category of universal grammar only hearing members and not non-members? That's like saying you go to the island and your first 4 days all you see is edible mushrooms, so there's no problem, and then you get to the part of the island where there are inedible ones, and now you're in real trouble, right? So how come children can learn language without and speak in compliantly with universal grammar without making any mistakes? It's how come they don't do supervised learning in universal grammar? The punchline is that it's innate in their brains. But the way you find it out is that they just don't make the errors. They just know how to do it right without any errors. And the reason they know how to do it right is because you do need a feature detector, just like you need with red, green, orange, and with zebras. You need a feature detector, but the feature detector is in there, and it's not only innate, but it's implicit. You don't even think it. Just as ordinary grammatical compliance becomes innate. You learn the rules and eventually forget the rules. You have trouble if you learned how to speak English from a grammar school, and then 30 years later you have to teach it to a Gabonese child. You wouldn't remember all the rules. You would follow them, but you wouldn't remember. So you wouldn't be a very good teacher for them, because you need to get all of the problems that they're likely to encounter forward. Because even with ordinary grammar, it becomes implicit, but it can be recovered.